Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name's Stewart Clarke. I'm the editor of TBI magazine, but more importantly, we've got a great panel, and we're looking at today the notion that this is a golden age of storytelling for drama, for scripted programming, how talent is migrating from film to TV, some of the funding models and new ways of putting shows together that underpin that. And as I say, great panel to talk through those issues. So starting from the end is Carrie Stein. Now Carrie is EVP, Global Production at E1, Entertainment One Television, responsible for expanding the company corporately, commercially, in the global space, making alliances with producers, packaging and overseeing productions and international co-pros, looking at content from around the world. And prior to E1, was Managing Director of 3 Arts International, where she represented production companies and showrunners, and before that was CEO of Alchemy Television. Real international pedigree, putting some really interesting projects together. To my right is Chris Phillip. Chris is CEO of Sierra Engine Television. Now Chris has got experience in distribution, production, as an exec producer. Sierra Engine is a JV, it's a joint venture between Engine Entertainment and Nick Meyer's indie film company Sierra Affinity. Chris is the exec producer of a new NBC series, Siberia, and Tribune Broadcasting's new Dolph Lundgren series, SAF3. That is SAF3.
Safe, everything.
Okay, good stuff. And is also working with third-party producers on shows like Crossbones, the pirate show for NBC, Black Box, and Georgeville TV's The After from Chris Carter, the guy that made The X-Files. To my left, we have Neal. Gub is one of 3 founders, I believe, of Artist Studio, which is a UK-based micro studio, content creation machine. I'll let Gub explain in a bit more detail. Gub's worked on shows including Thorn, internationally on things like Combat Hospital, and Carrie had some involvement, I understand. And most recently, The Fall, which is huge critical acclaim and performed really well in the UK and is doing well internationally. Before going to Artist Studio and setting that up, Gub was head of drama at Channel 4, the UK free-to-air broadcaster, and at Granada. So we'll get into looking at what each of the panellists are doing in some detail. There's some kind of case study stuff and some broader bits as well, and hopefully some time for questions. But before we do that, just quickly, I'd just like to get a thought from each of the panellists in terms of what we mean by a golden age of storytelling. This panel is kind of predicated on that being true. Is this a golden age of storytelling? And if so, why is that the case? So, Carrie, perhaps if we could come to you first.
Is this on?
It's
Okay.
on.
Hi, everyone. Having worked in television for the past 25 years, I think the opportunity around the world is like never before. There's more content. I think I heard a statistic recently. If there were 130 dramas on TV a year or two ago, now the number is well over 200. There are shows being made between countries, moving from country to country. There are hardly any borders anymore, and the bar is here. So people are challenging themselves to make better stories, better series. Film actors are coming to television. Movie directors, movie writers are coming to television, seeing the opportunity to make stories that maybe you can't make on film. So whereas, when I was an agent at ICM, the film agents always got the most attention, and TV was sort of like the lowly stepsister. It's really flipped, and I think the opportunities in television right now are just fantastic.
Chris, is this a golden age?
It sure is. I think the boundaries have been removed with pay TV exploding with original programming that really tells the story the creators want to tell, and they can get as edgy as they want. I'm talking from the States. Series like Sopranos and all original content, and that kind of opened up the door and removed the stigma that TV had attached to it over the years, where film talent wouldn't really step into television until their golden years, and that's not the case now. And it's evident that film talent, producers, financiers particularly, are looking to invest heavily into television because so many platforms have emerged. They all need original content to grow their subscriber base, and that translates into more opportunity creatively. And I guess that's why we're here today.
And then you just hold on to that one. And Gub, I mean, these guys are based in the US, work in the international business very much. You're based in the UK, and I know you've worked internationally as well. But from perhaps with more, seeing it more from a UK perspective, do you buy into this notion that we are, in the middle of a golden age when it comes to scripted?
I mean, there was a lot of talk about how cinema was going to come home into people's houses, advance in technology. I think the great thing that people discovered is that TV was already in your home. And there's been a wonderful kind of reacquaintanceship with the idea of authorship and authors' voices. And I think, to be honest, that's largely a lot of the cable channels in the US can be credited with putting the author back in the saddle, finding very intimate ways of telling stories. Cinema's been largely about effects, and I think TV is about effectiveness. It's about actually getting across to an audience in a way where it has a kind of complexity and an intimacy. And Carrie's right, the bar is being set very high now in terms of the international travel of those stories. And in a way, I think it's liberating now that authors can work with, 12 or even 13 hours in a single run, set up characters in a way that you can never really achieve in a 2-hour movie. There's clearly an imperative in movies as well to create, things that actually literally make you twist in your seat and have a kind of sensory power. But I think the thing about TV is it gets in your head and it makes you twist in your head. And when it's really fantastic, it becomes totally addictive. And it's really, in my mind, it's the reacquaintance with very high-tier writing, a quality of writing that comes from singular authorship that we've really witnessed. And I think we would probably all agree that in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a kind of benchmark in terms of cable writing, shows that actually people can't stop talking about, can't stop watching, go back, gorge like on chocolates in sort of entire box sets. This is something that really didn't happen even in the mass days of Dynasty in Dallas, where people were flocking to the TV in hordes. It didn't quite get into people's heads in quite the same way. And I think it's this ambition of reaching a kind of intellectual and an emotional plateau, which is hugely exciting. And I just want to say one last thing, Stewart, about this. I noticed a couple of films I saw recently, Between the Pines and Prisoners, both of which are fantastic films. I was watching them and I got halfway through and I thought, these are TV shows. Actually, they're in the territory of police procedural shows. And I thought that in a way that sort of indicates something about the sort of milieu that television's been working in at the top end, that cinema at one level is now definitely chasing it.
Now,
it's fascinating.
Again, when we spoke ahead of the session, and you said something interesting, because this is, if this is a golden age, thinking about it from a UK perspective, how is that different from previous times when we've had kind of author-led shows from, Bleasdale or Potter or Polyakov?
I think the only thing I would identify is not so much, it's not a different kind of greatness. It's just that I think there's greater diversity. I think what Chris said about boundaries, moving. I think we're living in a world where we can watch more that's expansive. We can watch shows, whether they're rebooted or not, that come from Scandinavia in a way that we would never have done years ago. And what I really have witnessed, and I think is fantastic, is you start to see the impact of those shows as they travel on their journey around the world. They start to affect the way that other shows and dramas develop. So, it's true. The Scandinavians reinvented the crime genre. Fantastic. Hats off to them. They got in and tunneled in there and found something different. They found a novel way of doing it. It could be Colds to Newcastle in terms of selling it back to the US and having a US reboot of it. But I think it has the effect of just enhancing the overall culture of the medium.
And Carrie, I think you mentioned there's been there's a change in attitudes between film and TV. TV is no longer the poor relation necessarily. But I mean, I wonder, is a lot of what we're talking about, and there's a lot of that migration of people from in front and behind the camera from film to TV, effectively because of the failings of the movie business as much as it is about the strengths of the TV business?
It's hard to know. It just takes one or two or three people to move into a different area before everyone wants to do it. Kevin Spacey doing House of Cards on Netflix, suddenly it was all right. It used to be that only HBO would attract film talent. And to try to get film talent to do network television was really hard. Now what's happening is because the cable channels have gotten all those film people to create shows. Now what's interesting is that the networks are starting to be competitive with cable because they don't want to lose their audience entirely. So this year, this is the first development season in the US that the networks were looking for serialized television content. I mean, serialized content has been forbidden up till now. In fact, when I had a lunch with the head of drama at CBS at the beginning of the sales season, and she said, we're not looking for any episodic.
And
So
this is the network.
this is the network that does CSI and NCIS, and they are known as the episodic network. So they had great success this year with Under the Dome. We'll see what happens with Hostages. But anyway, it's just changing before our eyes. As is the way television is put together. I don't want to jump ahead, so I'll leave that to you.
And Chris, it's interesting when there's talk of a golden age. I think often people are referring to shows that are on US cable networks, as Carrie is suggesting. Perhaps that's changing. Now, the interesting thing is, you as an indie producer, you're managing to get kind of high concept, interesting shows away on the networks, aren't you? And I mean, one, it might be a good time to take a look at some of the stuff you're doing. But there are the models for funding these, and the way that becomes possible is evolving.
Well, the reality is we don't have anything special with content. Our scripts are all very good. What really changes the model for us is the financial involvement, where we commit to a certain percentage of the budget, or we finance the entire series, and the straight-to-series model is what makes this project that we have in hand, a script, much more appealing. Then the network knows through the creative process internally, where they have creative control, the project will be shaped and formed into what they want. But the straight-to-series model is really changing the entire business, where it allows independent companies to come in and have equity or full ownership of a network primetime series. And then if it turns into a CSI, we all know how lucrative that could be. But we with our network shows, when we meet with producers or writers, there's nothing really special about our note-taking. They don't come to me for my ability to give creative notes on scripts. They come for the money, they come for the distribution, they come for this model that makes the shows more appealing. And that really is representative of what we do at CR Engine. And
that straight-to-series model, I mean, that goes, something like Crusoe would have been an early example of that on NBC.
Yeah, we did that in 2007, I believe, and that was a meeting with Ben Silverman when he was running NBC, and we went through this big fancy catalog, and he stopped at Crusoe and said, that's what I want to do. You have a 13-episode order. I didn't quite digest that until he said, you actually have an order of a series. And that, when I was at Power with Justin Bodel, we didn't quite understand what that meant, and that was, we pay for the whole show, they pay a license fee, and somehow we have to figure out the financing, which is a mix of tax credits and international sales. And it was challenging, but we delivered it, and it aired 13 weeks. It didn't get renewed, but it kind of set the trend for major broadcasters to trust independent production companies. And again, we had nothing special in that booklet. It was just an idea that they were interested in.
But can I just add something to that, which is, it's true that it changes the financing when you do a straight to series show. But what's also true is that in the past, and I guess it's true in the film world as well, if you look back 15 years to when it was a studio model and the studios had real hands-on creative input in the films that you did, and then it went to an indie model where people had to put the financing together and put the creative together on their own. What's happening in television with this straight to series model is that the creative onus is now on the independent producer, who's not used to that. I mean, honestly, especially, it may be different, Gub, in the UK market. I think it is.
I think it's a little different.
Yeah, I think the UK market has always been a much more author-driven business. But the LA model, the studios and the networks are very involved creatively, giving notes on every aspect, casting, script, DPs. So when suddenly you bring financing to the table and now you're going straight to series, it's a little bit hands off, and producers, we have to deliver with that model great television, or we're not going to get to do it again.
Well, you're not going to get paid either.
Right.
Is there a concern with a straight to series show that the network won't show it quite as much love as something that's come through the more traditional process?
Well, I think they don't pay as much attention to it. They're paying less money. They're not spending as much promoting it. So you're sort of on your own. It's do or die time. You have to deliver something that's creatively strong, and you got to find a way to bring an audience to it.
But that kind of speaks, Carrie, doesn't it, to stepping up. You have to embrace the concept of marketing. You have to actually become much more proactive and even financially responsible for the promotion and propelling of a show. I don't necessarily think that's the bad thing. If the quid pro quo is that you get a greater degree of influence over the piece, and in a sense, as far as the central talent's concerned, and I would argue that is the writing talent, you can, in a sense, curate and facilitate in a much more enabled way than you would be if you essentially having to get the studio to square off, you're having to get the network to square off, you're having to get a whole host of other investors to square off. It's very hard to retain that closeness to the material. And I think the other thing you said, which is really interesting, is this reduction in hours, this idea of going for serialized story over a shorter run. It enables you to do things that you previously were just inhibited from doing because they had to go to 13 with a back order of 9 or whatever. And that very much dictated the kind of subjects you could tackle, and indeed the context in which you could tackle them.
And now, can I ask the panel a question? So the move to kind of very intellectually challenging, highly serialized shows works with a certain demographic, certainly works for US cable channels and perhaps the networks in some instances. However, if you look internationally at the shows that do the best business, that generate the most money, are in fact the most popular, let's be honest, it's not those shows, it's actually the procedurals, it's actually the shows that are probably a bit less, that they don't get the same critical acclaim. So is there a disconnect?
I would have to say that we're going through a transition period. I mean, I would. When suddenly you go from one extreme to the other, one extreme being the old model where, the networks and studios are hands-on, and then all of a sudden you're left on your own. I think we've all seen some of these straight-to-series orders fumble a little. There's an interesting thing when all of a sudden you look around, you go, I can give this show a green light. Oh, hey, I have the financing. I can pull the trigger. And then you're asking yourself, are we ready to pull the trigger? Is this, is the script good enough? Do we have the right cast? So it's a different process. And so I think what will happen, similar again to the indie films, think of the earliest indie films, it was a little rough and tumble. So I think we are very early days in this sort of new developing model of television. I think 5 years from now, there will be a little more consistency. Having said that, there's obviously some shows that have broken out of the gate that are fantastic.
And I think as the cycles change in the U.S., they will as well in Europe. From a serialized procedural to serialized. I can't hear The Mentalist one more time in a meeting when you ask people what they're looking for in Europe. It's Mentalist, it's House, it's... however, it is changing. There's an appetite, not just on pay TV. Free TV is interested in serialized. And I think time will tell, just how interested.
Yeah, I think that's part of the voyage of discovery that everyone's making, and especially the networks recently, that you can't just keep serving up the same soup, because what your cable competitors are doing, and instantly they're no longer your competitors because they're now competing with each other, they're not interested in you anymore, is they are doing just that. They're going to places that you have never been. They are doing things that you've never seen, and it's having an extraordinary impact. What you said, Stewart, about, at a commercial end, in terms of the broad sort of fodder of international TV, it's still only a very small fraction. But I'd argue it's a very influential fraction. It's the fraction that the people in the know, the people who write, they spread that influence, and it has to be attended to, and it has to be fed. And if you want to chase a bottom end demographic, then do it with entertainment, do it with Strictly Dancing, do it with if you're going for the top end demographic, the valuable end of it, then you've got to be up there competing with the best of them. And that means corralling, lassoing, persuading, bringing in the very best talent. And I think, just going back to the transition that Carrie was talking about, I think that is something that a number of us would probably never have believed, the scale of talent that you will now attract into television. Frankly, almost anything's possible.
And one thing I think that we're seeing, and Carrie, I'm going to come to you on this, and perhaps we can look at some video as well, is that increasingly broadcasters in territories that are not English speaking will actually commission English speaking shows. Equally, broadcasters will buy, in the UK, for example, will buy foreign language shows as well. There's kind of a democratization, or what, I don't know if that's the correct word, but there's a more openness to having shows that are not in, the native language. So that might be a good time for you to tell us about Welcome to Sweden.
I'd love to.
Did I mention?
Should we show the clip?
Should we have the clip first?
Yeah,
Let's do that.
Why don't we show the clip, and then I can give you a little background on it.
Bruce Evans, American. And what is your business in Sweden? You can just put down love.
Hey. Who is Bruce?
I don't know how much Emma has told you, but
You left a big shot job, big career. You made lots of money, you had celebrity clients, and you moved to Sweden to live with our daughter.
Yep. No, I can't. Sorry, I can't.
Are you serious now?
Yes, he's right out in the yard.
He's not right out there. He's like way back.
Moving porridge. Heter det så?
No idea what you're saying. So. Do you think I'm depressed?
Aren't you?
No. I'm just trying to act more Swedish.
Well, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between depressed and Swedish.
Do you think I'm funny?
For an accountant? Sure. Well, have fun in Norway and to have a great time in life.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. It was Sweden, but...
You don't quit on Gene Simmons. No one quits on Gene Simmons. This is your mess. You're going to clean it up, okay?
Okay, I'll fix it.
And Emma, I'd like to show you my backstage area sometime.
Stop stalking my boyfriend.
You should put a tour of Stockholm inside of me for me today.
I'd like to see some Vikings in their natural habitat.
Welcome to Sweden.
So I think you could have looked at that and asked anyone in the audience to guess the broadcaster. I'm not sure they would have guessed SVT in Sweden.
Actually, TV4. Oops.
They would have been wrong if they'd have guessed SVT.
yes.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, you're right, TV4, but a Swedish broadcaster.
Yeah, so TV4 in Sweden commissioned this show, and it was sort of a funny confluence of events, which I'll keep short. Before I was at E1, I worked at 3 Arts, where we represented Amy Poehler, and her manager sent me the script on the Monday after I returned from a trip to Scandinavia. And I'd met with the head of programming at TV4, who had said, you know, I would be open to doing a show in English, which, you know, you kind of went, really? Like, what would that be? And then there on my desk is this script, Welcome to Sweden, that Amy and her brother Greg were executive producing, and Greg was starring. And it's based on Greg's true story. He fell in love with a Swedish girl. He was living in New York, and he left his life, and he left his job, and he moved to Stockholm. And Greg has never acted and never written a television show, but he wrote this script, and it was quite good. And a week later, I called Osa, who I just met, and I said, you know, let's do this. And she was so excited that I was interested. And I just saw it very clearly. I saw it as a show that was universal conceptually, right? Love is universal. You know, we've all had that experience, whether we leave and move to a new country or move across country or move to another state for someone we've fallen in love with. And then there was the whole fish out of water element, which many people have experienced. And I thought it was a show that would travel. I knew that having Amy and Greg involved would attract an interesting cast, which obviously it has. The conceit of the show is that all those guest stars that you see are ex-clients of Bruce's. So Bruce in the show is a celebrity money manager, and his clients, some of them follow him to Sweden, some of them call him and make him come back to help with their taxes. And, you know, that will be a recurring storyline through the series. But at the heart of the show, it's, will these two make it? You know, so it's somewhat of a romantic comedy. Anyway, I love that we're doing this show. I love being partnered with TV4. You know, I live in LA. My business, while it's a global business, you know, for most of my years, I've spent it in LA selling to US networks. And some of you may have read, we announced today that we've now sold the show to NBC in the States. So NBC and TV4 will launch the show together. Obviously, NBC is Amy Poehler's network. She's on Parks and Rec. And it's just fantastic. You know, the bulk of the show is in English. It's in Swedish language when Swedes are talking to each other. But it's organically, it organically works for more than one market.
And it was made without there being a sale in the US or another international market. It was made just for TV4.
Right.
Who were going to show it subtitled?
Well, it's English. You know, Bruce does not speak Swedish. So he speaks English. He's in almost every scene. So for the most part, it's English, you know, except when he's not there.
Or would it be subtitled for the Swedish market?
That's what I mean.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes.
But I mean, so how does a Swedish originate? How does the budget for a Swedish originated series compare to that with a North American series?
It's less. A lot less.
So how as a production, how do you get around that on screen in terms of the production challenge?
You know, I'll tell you
presents?
something interesting. When I saw their budget for the first time, I was a little bit worried because I was thinking, okay, you know, my company E1 is going to have to sell this globally, and you don't sell shows globally unless they have the production value comparable to a U.S. show. But interestingly enough, first of all, the cost of shooting is simply less. And then they do things very differently than we do it in LA. And I would have to say we could all take a lesson or two from some of our foreign partners that make shows for considerably less money. You know, I tell the story, the day that I got to the set, I was on the set and nobody was there. And there was a makeup woman and she said, oh, they'll be here in a minute. And it didn't look like any set I had ever been on. There were no trailers. There were no trucks. There were no cables. It was just an empty street in Stockholm. And all of a sudden, about 5 minutes later, about 20 bicycles arrived with people on them. They leaned them against the wall of a building. And I swear to God, within 10 minutes, they were shooting the next scene. So it's very much, you know, on their feet. And, you know, they do without some of the luxuries that we spend millions of dollars on. And it's very refreshing.
And from a storytelling perspective, are there many stories that you've got, confidence will work across multiple markets in that way? Because you're also doing something with BET, aren't you, and CBC?
Yeah, we're
in
doing
Canada?
a mini series, Book of Negroes, which is CBC and BET. And the Book of Negroes is a very particular story that works for those two broadcasters.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the challenge, and we've all had this conversation in terms of the shows we look at. The only way that you're going to attract strong broadcast partners is if your story works for those partners. Whenever any of us has tried to jam it in, and it doesn't really work organically, it ultimately doesn't work. So Welcome to Sweden works. Welcome to Sweden is a similar model as the show Lilyhammer, which many of you have probably heard of, or the show Episodes that BBC and Showtime do together, where they all have a foot in two countries. We'd be wasting our time to try to copy that unless something just comes up that makes sense.
Chris, coming to you, maybe we should take a look at some of the stuff you're working on, and then we can talk through a couple of the projects, because I know there's interesting stories behind them and models. So if we could run Chris's VT.
Run it first?
Yeah, the video. Okay.
What's your ETA? 30 seconds.
We will get you out of here, okay?
I don't want anyone else on that beach.
Mommy! I
One, two.
Clear! Ready to stop!
So some of you may say that sure looks a lot like Baywatch. It's actually from the creator of Baywatch, Greg Bonin, who took a 15-year hiatus, and now he decided to go back into syndication, which is how Baywatch really was financed. That's an interesting case study. It was on NBC, canceled. International was so strong that they brought it back from International and did a barter deal in syndication, and it was a huge success for 12 more years. So the syndication market is coming back. We cleared it in 98% of the country, the U.S., and did some pre-sales, but it wasn't that easy. It took about 2.5, 3 years and 4 name changes and different scripts to actually get. What was needed was investors to take the risk on that. There's no network paying a license fee that you can add to get to your total that you need to break even. It's all a barter deal with the station groups and with the networks locally. So we finally found film investors in Emmett Furla, and they put up the money that was needed. The show's in production in South Africa, and it started airing in the States. It's 20 episodes. It is one of those things where in the 4th season, it's under the radar. Some of you in this room may not even hear of it again. It's gonna then come back, and you'll see 80 episodes on TNT or USA Network for a hefty license fee, and everyone will wonder, how did this happen? And that's the syndication model. It's just slow building an audience, but you have a lot of volume. And we've sold it in 50 markets. And Dolph has obviously has made the transition to television while he's doing Expendables. And it's a perfect example of film investors and film talent coming into television.
And we can look at another one of yours.
Sure. This is Siberia.
"16 contestants.
We made it!
Set out on a new survival show.
I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to make money.
They have no idea what will happen next.
It's been an accident, and unfortunately, it's fatal.
Why is no one answering?
This is just a show, isn't it?
It's not what I signed up for.
Get us out of here!
NBC's Siberia premieres July 1st.
This series was a very unique model in that independent filmmakers decided to use some of their feature film investment partners and produce a series.
It's fully funded.
Fully funded.
So it's uniquely risky.
There was no network attached anywhere. And they started production in Canada. And I saw a little bit of it, and I said, this is brilliant. Because it essentially is a fake reality show. You bond with the contestants, however they're actors, and it turns into Lost and a little bit of X-Files along the way. So it was a quick pitch to NBC, and they bought it. And it aired within 2 months from the pitch. And that's a pretty record time, and it put a lot of pressure on us, internationally to get going, because what if it doesn't work? So it did work. It was up against Under the Dome, which is a problem, but the DVR viewers was 30 to 40% each week, and the fan base was strong. So we're considering a second season independent of NBC, which kind of forces them to buy it, because there are 3 million people that are want to know what happens next.
Chris,
and I'll be getting calls at home.
It's getting the NBC deal was a very big deal. Had you have not got that on network TV, how much could you have cleared of the budget internationally? Did it have to have a US broadcaster?
Well, we would have been able to, in time, clear the budget. I think the best thing about having NBC, the film guys said, why don't we just edit it down into a 2-hour movie and release it as a feature film, which was an option for them to recoup their money. And it's an interesting. I was shocked when quite frankly, when I heard that they're paying for the whole thing without a network. So I think we all got lucky getting a major network to buy the show, but they believed in the idea. We all believe that it's such a unique concept that has never been done in television, where you're hooking the viewers into thinking that this is, and you bond with them, yet they die. People are dying left and right. They're going crazy in a remote region with a lot of, mystery and mythology around this area in Siberia, that we rolled the dice and we did it. But it's not a model that you're going to see repeated quite often. But these guys want to do it again, so we have an idea.
These guys would do it with a different project as opposed to season 2.
Yeah. Well, no, both.
Okay.
So they'll do a second season and they'll do a new show.
Second season and a new show.
Had that not have worked, they would have lost their shirt. That was a risk.
I don't think so. I think the international would have worked over time, and we would have been able to clear the production budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And did you have one more?
Yeah. So there's nothing else to see, but there are just 2 more examples, 2 more case studies that we can go to the next slide. So Black Box, this is an ABC straight-to-series order, 13 episodes. Kelly Riley, Vanessa Redgrave. It is a female house. She is a neuroscientist that works in a facility that solves medical mysteries of the brain. It's a closed-ended procedural mixed with a little bit of serialized with her relationships, both in the hospital and outside. She's brilliant. Her partner is a neurosurgeon that is also brilliant. They both think they're the smartest people in the room. They have an attraction. And one of the things, though, about her that's unique is she is suffering from mental illness. She's bipolar and schizophrenic, and she self-medicates. And sometimes it doesn't work, and you see the episodes and how it affects her life. But every morning she shows up at work, she's presented with a medical mystery of the brain that she solves. And so it's a little mix of House, Grey's Anatomy with a unique personal tale that we follow throughout. The whole thing was packaged by WME, William Morris, and they put this together in a very unique way with a global eye, and it hopefully works. It's a big budget show, and we're proud to be part of it. The next one is NBC's Crossbones. Again, perfect example of straight to series, film talent, and John Malkovich. Enormous budget. We have sold it, and we're continuing to sell it internationally. It's doing very well on a pre-sales basis. And the clients, what they like about this, the broadcasters, is they know they're getting 10 episodes. It's not, all these straight-to-series orders is not 4 episodes and out. When I was at Universal, I sold our shows, and it's great. Pilot season, people in a room like this sit in LA at the May screenings and love everything, buy everything, and then the one thing that they really liked doesn't work in the States but worked in their country, and it's canceled after 4 episodes. That doesn't happen with these straight-to-series orders. And Crossbones and Black Box are going into production this month.
Good stuff. Thank you, Chris. Gub, now coming. If we can talk about The Fall, because The Fall's a really interesting show. Now, if we could start with the end, that would be kind of interesting, because I remember in the UK it was 5 1-hours.
Yeah, the initial order was for 5 1 hours. Yeah.
And in the UK, for people not from the UK and didn't see it, the ending, it caused a lot of debate because it's a show about a serial killer, and it wasn't neatly wrapped up, no spoilers, but it wasn't a traditional ending. Now, was that always what Alan Cubitt had in mind with that show?
It was always designed essentially to have a long reach, and I think the minimum was 12 hours. Oh, sorry, the minimum was going to be 12 hours.
So he squashed it into 5?
Effectively, well, I say the minimum was going to be 12, possibly more.
Okay.
But the longest order that we could get from the BBC on the first run initially was 6, and then we lost an hour in discussion. So it was scrunched down to 5. We're now luckily doing the second season, which I'm proud to say was ordered after the second night went out, and it's 6 hours.
So had it not have done well,
longer.
And it did, and I know the numbers were good critically, great reception.
Yeah.
Had it not done well, it would have ended there. It's almost like season 1 had to do well in order for this to be resolved.
It would have been fairly brutal, but it would not have been inconceivable to have finished a first run altogether with the killer. I won't give anything away. Not being where he should be, and the thing not being wrapped up.
And sorry, to put it into context, I started at the end, which is probably a little silly. For people who don't know about the show, can you just quickly explain what it is?
Yeah, it has a slightly unusual conceit in that you start a serial killer story with the serial killer, and you spend effectively the first 5 hours studying him, watching his modus operandum, watching him go home, give his kids tea. It normalizes what is an absolutely horrific tendency in a human being. And whilst we're watching this as almost like a lab rat, we're also watching an investigator trying to unravel the first killing that comes to light, and piece it together. So essentially we're watching 2 halves of a conjoined process, the hunter and the hunted. And I think what was unusual, and I think what really disturbed people, was that we were putting the killer for the first time in an unsensationalized context. He wasn't conspicuously a monster. He was a grief counsellor, actually. He led a normal life. This is one of the interesting things about the reality of doing a crime show like this, is that if you follow the reality, it is far more disturbing and dramatic than anything you can do as a piece of burlesque circus, which is what most... they get great audiences, but frankly, they're usually a hyperbolic version of what killers are really like. And what Alan did, because he spent 3 years, poor guy, with his head inside serial killing books, and talking, to his credit, to some very, very well-qualified psychologists who had really spent their lives studying serial killers, was he tried to really build something that had a veracity to it and a truthfulness to it. And the show did completely freak people out, including myself, and I spent 3.5 years working on it, primarily because I think it does strike a chord in which you watch it and you can't escape from thinking, oh, it's just fantasy. Of course it's a drama, of course it's a fiction, but it's modelled itself around something which is fundamentally, in terms of its behaviour, in terms of its sequence as an investigation, far closer to real-life cases than most drama stories follow.
And to put this into context, I think perhaps you need to explain that Artist Studio isn't a production company. You didn't pick this up, get it made. It's a slightly different model.
We're not an independent producing. We're not an independent set of independent producers in the conventional sense of hiring a writer in to do a project. we work absolutely as a bespoke entity. We partner with the talents, we share the property with the talents, and we try and get the best rights return we can for both ourselves and the talents. But it is essentially a top-end bespoke producing service in which the writer is essentially the stakeholder rather than the other way around. We actually work for the writer rather than the writer working for us. That's the fundamental distinction. And now Alan Cubitt, the writer at the heart of this show, is totally his show. We provided the infrastructure to allow him to produce it. He was on the set every day. He's actually going to direct the second season. It's a complete Alan show from top to bottom.
Do you think that other people making programmes, getting stuff on air in the UK are starting to put that level of power in the hands of the writer, more so than perhaps they have in the past?
I think it's a smart thing to do. I mean, I don't think it's rocket science. I just think if you want the best people, give them the best deal. And if you want to give them the best deal, put them in charge of what they know best, which is how to create. I'm not saying they want to do the VAT returns and the catering, because we can do that. So that's the easy bit. But they do want to have substantial influence over the casting, substantial influence over the edits. If they step up, it's like Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility. If you step up and you can fill those shoes, which is after all the cable model with the top-end showrunners is precisely that, then you become a massively valuable industry. And in the UK, we've sort of resisted it because we've still been in this slightly odd world where we generally patronise writers. We generally say, oh, well, you couldn't possibly take responsibility for hiring a director. What would you know about that? And they go, well, only write the fucking thing, So it is an emancipation, and I think it's progress. And I think we all, I say this, we're doing it, it's evident. Jane Featherstone with Kudos and Chris Chibnall on Broadchurch doing exactly the same thing. So it's not a completely unique model. But I think within our financial proposition, what we're also doing is we're absolutely 50-50 joint venturing, which is a little unusual.
And with that very kind of author-led approach, putting all the power in Alan's hands being him being at the centre of it. Most of it. Not the catering. Does it mean that would be harder to replicate should, for example, that a US partner wants to make a US version?
I think that actually the US is more familiar, certainly in the cable arena, with that model. I think it's different in network because network's a more commoditized version of that process. But it would be nice to think that in any recreation of that process, that one was looking at the same thing: top end talent, working in a highly responsible way, getting the best possible ideas on screen. Fighting the corner, having the negotiations that are required. I just think you get better results. I mean, if you've got the right person, you'll get better results.
Because what strikes me in each of these cases is, perhaps in different ways, but increasingly international, or having international partners, international funding is important in a way that it hasn't been historically. Is that a fair observation? Carrie?
I guess so. It's still a small percentage of the television business. I mean, I think maybe it's still less than 10% of all TV shows being made. So the majority of TV shows being made are still conventionally made.
And indigenous. I mean, they're for their own market, rather than being international co-production.
But and when there are lots of international partners, doesn't that run somewhat at odds with the notion of an author-led piece? When there are more voices at the table, can you create something truly outstanding and fantastic, do you think?
I think if you've involved a lot of different funding partners, it definitely becomes more complicated.
I mean, that's the challenge, right?
And that is the challenge. I mean, although on the full, we had ZDF Enterprises invested, we had, we weren't doing it totally solo with the BBC. And the answer is, you have to carry those relationships along with you, and at the same time say we're doing this in a very monolithic way. We have a showrunner, we have a writer, he's also producing the show. And you just have to work on the basis that everyone's signing up to that.
But I think one of the biggest changes in television today is, in all my years, there was always this question that we all asked, what are you looking for? You'd meet with the network, what are you looking for this season? And for the first time, the buyers are saying, bring us something that we haven't seen. Bring us something that's visionary. Bring us something that that somebody has authored, and that's incredibly refreshing. And I think that's all over the world. So unless you're working with talent that has a strong point of view, you're not going to get on the air today.
I think it's a really good point Carrie's making, which is the distinctiveness of voice. And it comes out of the intimacy that the audience can have with a storyteller when he's going, this really is my story, and you're going to listen to my characters. And it's not coming through a committee, and it's not 120 different points of view.
Right. And Stewart, what you're saying is true with all these different funders. For the first time, there are people that are having a hand in the creative process that want to have a voice. And so it takes a strong producer or group of producers to be really clear about the vision. And we've all been there, having to navigate through the financial participants and maintain that creative voice. It's really hard to do. So,
and Carrie, you mentioned something interesting when we spoke prior to this, that in certain parts of the production sector, there's actually something approaching a skill shortage because of the requirements for lots of drama in terms of perhaps showrunners or the right kind of writers. Is that really the case?
Yeah, I mean, for the first time ever, there's a shortage of top showrunners. There's so much television being made, and I mean, I've never seen it like this. Where you go to an agency, one of the big agencies, and you say, can you send me a list? And the list is 6 people that have never really run their own show. So the top people in the business are all working, and that's great. That speaks to what I said earlier, that there's over 200 shows being made. For people like us who are, producing and trying to find the best writers, it forces us to take chances with young writers, new voices. I mean, we've, as a company, E1 this year, we've just sold 5 or 6 shows in this past selling season for development. And we've worked with new writers, and I have to tell you, it's incredibly exciting, a little nerve-wracking. You don't know what you're going to get, but ultimately, it's really fun to discover new talent and take a chance and to deliver. We'll see.
I think the thing that comes out of that as well is that there's really something to aspire to. If you see people coming into the industry now at that lower level or that less experienced level as a writer, you can look around now, and there are some really luminary people to aspire to work. You can look at it and say, I want to be doing that in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and there are so many examples of that. But I mean, Carrie's right. There has to be a fair amount more risk taking, and you have to take your chances on new people. Otherwise, that's not going to happen.
And sorry, Chris.
I know the networks have been very receptive to reading scripts from baby writers, and that's the perfect example of what Carrie mentioned.
I mean, Chris, I'm curious. You have very much kind of brought lots of people from the film community to the TV business in some interesting ways. Do you think the migration of film talent to TV raises the bar in terms of the end product?
Definitely raises the budget, because they're accustomed to their own costume designers and their crew that they work with on features, and it's a totally different level of cost
and longer schedules.
And longer schedules. So I think the bar is set high. They are perfectionists. They want that Oscar, or they want to hit the box office, at the level that the studio expects. So they're used to overachieving or trying. Not that TV isn't, but these are especially, they're different people. Feature film production companies and producers. They look at the project in a very different way. Storytelling is a bit different, and not good or bad. It's just different.
More demanding, or in what?
Yeah. I think the creative process of episodic is something that they're growing into, and I'm not saying anything specific from our side, but from our projects. But I've seen that in general, that they look at the project as one big show, one big movie, one big story arc, and TV is not like that.
Right. Okay.
TV is very, very much standalone. You have to hold an audience, and the network has to be happy, and they have to sell advertising for that hour.
Need to get to the next episode.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the floor? We're pretty much at an end. If there's anything. Okay, not at the moment. Oh, sorry. There is one middle back there. Is there a microphone?
Yeah, hello. It seems to be that television has benefited more from all these digital revolution that cinema. I would like to know, what do you think about that, and why do you think that is, if you agree to that?
So has the advent of digital platforms, Netflix, and
like all these social
like
media, new windows for new ways of financing, all that.
Well, I can tell you, for Siberia, the fans are really helping determining whether we get a second season. I sent the blogs that were about 50 pages long of fans that wanted to come back, and sent it over to the chairman of NBC, and I swore I didn't write them or pay people, but that helps. Every little bit helps.
Interesting.
We had with the show we showed earlier this year, The Fall, on BBC Two, we were getting 3 million viewers, and on iPlayer, the virtual platform, within the same week we were getting another 1 million. So that's a quarter of the audience volume added, essentially by a supporting virtual platform. So I think there's no doubt the capacity for audiences, if they like something, as Chris is saying, to be able to go out there and either watch it again or download it. It reinforces whatever success or halo effect the show is having. And it creates a traffic, an interest, a level of gossip. It's like a giant water cooler thing of expanded conversation. I think it's invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
Good stuff. Thank you, everyone. So we've run out of time, but these guys, I understand, will be outside if you want to chat or ask anything in person. So let me just say thank you very much. Really interesting contributions from Carrie, Chris, and Gov. Thanks, guys.